Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ellie. I'm here with Ben Wagner, and we're going to be working in Illustrator today, doing some logo design. So excited that you guys are all here. Say hi to us in the chat. Let us know where you are watching from. We have Wade and Taylor. We have Isaac from Ghana. That's awesome. Thank you for joining from across the world. Michael, yeah, let us know if you guys are joining for the first time, if you're a long-time Adobe Live viewer, we'd love to hear that. And yeah, where you're watching from is always fun to hear as well. So thanks for being here. Hi, Michelle. Cool. Well, we can go ahead and pull up our schedule. We have a full day today, lots of things going on. We can take a look at that. So this morning, there was a Photoshop stream with Shauna, and then a Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge with Kathleen, and then photo compositing with Claudie. And then Claudie jumped back in again for our Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge, and we'll be reviewing those challenges in a little bit. And then I'm live right now with Ben. And then after will be an XD Daily Creative Challenge with Howard, and then a draw along with Kyle, and then a design off with Voodoo Val and Delta Tango Mike. Wow, two really fun names. So make sure you stick around. There's a lot going on today. You can watch replays of all of these streams if you missed any of the ones from earlier today. But make sure you stick around so that you can learn all of these awesome programs. Cool. Looks like we have some more people joining us. We have your Chirma from India. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name. Richa from France. Claudia. Hey guys. Well, let's get into it. I would love to introduce you guys to Ben, and Ben's going to walk you through a little bit about who he is and what he's going to be working on today.
Hi, thanks, Al. My name is Ben Wagner. I'm a designer and art director based in Brooklyn, New York. And I have a pretty diverse design background. I've worked at studios, agencies, in-house, and startups. Now I run my own small design studio called Lido. And I'm just gonna walk through like some of our work. But basically, we work on a lot of holistic branding projects. So typically it's not just a logo, but we're sort of thinking about the whole brand world, the logo, the color palette, typography, and then often there's like an art direction component. So that's kind of what I do by day. I also teach a branding class at Parsons.
Fun. That's
yeah, it's very fun. Maybe some of my students are on here. But basically why I enjoy branding is I think that I'm a big picture and a details thinker, and I think there is a variety, there's an opportunity to work on a huge variety of things when you work in branding. And I think it's also one of the places where you can have kind of the most transformative impact on like a small business. So I really enjoy like feeling like I'm helping my clients kind of legitimize their business or take it to the next level or whatever. Yeah, so those are kind of some of our projects. And you can see more on my website at benfwagner.com or on social at benfwagner. And I just want to say, like, if you have any questions about what's happening today, like that I can't get to in the chat, feel free to ask me or email me or whatever, and I'll try to get back to you quickly. Yeah, so today we'll be designing a logo, mostly in Illustrator, and then doing some applications, I think tomorrow in Illustrator, InDesign, potentially Photoshop. And one thing I just wanted to call out before I get started is like most of my projects, I'm not just designing a logo. So this is kind of an overview of my general process. And in this particular case, I did like all 4 of those top things before starting because I wanted to be able to use the programs the most. But I kind of start with a kickoff and questionnaire, do some strategic work and some research, and then I sort of start sketching and get into design, which is what we'll be doing today. And then I kind of work with the client to revise and work on additional applications depending on the client. And basically, to intro the client that I'll be working on today, the name is Ozemba Beauty, and it's this woman in Westchester, New York. Her name is Alexa Ozemba, and she is starting like a beauty brand, offering spa services. It's kind of like a skincare, self-care, mostly facials and waxing to start, but eventually has ambitions to kind of launch a full service spa and potential skincare product line in the future. So that's kind of, these all came from that discovery process and that questionnaire. And then down at the bottom, I have these adjectives just to keep in mind when I'm designing. So fresh, fun, knowledgeable, flexible, relaxing, inviting, sleek, and modern. But that's kind of like the kickoff. If anyone has more questions about the questionnaire, I'm happy to like answer those as we go. But I kind of wanted to get started as quickly as we could. So yeah, that's
awesome. You do have one of your students, Lisa, from your class.
Oh my gosh, hi Lisa.
Yes. We have Trevor from Seattle. Oh, Justin says that they've gotten a facial from your client and she was so good.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So cool. Cool. Yeah, let's get started. And I want to remind you guys too to be working on the Daily Creative Challenge while Ben is designing. If you missed the video for that, you can watch the replay. But today, the challenge is to enhance a photograph using vector graphics, playing around with halftones and strokes and the pen tool. So make sure that you're working on that and you submit because we want to see what you guys come up with. And Ben will be offering some feedback on that in about an hour and a half. So would love to see what you guys create.
So yeah, my students in my class should be familiar with this, but basically this is how I start every project. It's with sort of sketches, and my sketches are terrible, so please don't judge me. But basically, this was sort of me. I just did this morning and yesterday, sort of starting to think about some initial ideas for the brand. So as I'm looking at this brand name here, a lot of these sketches are like for composition more than they are for actual design. And so I'm sort of starting to notice like, okay, there's the same number of letters in Ozemba and in Beauty. Maybe there's some sort of like monospace thing or like alignment that we can play on. Maybe there's some sort of combination like OB monogram that I can work with. I sort of focused on that idea a lot. And then I started to notice that it looks a little bit like this. In the questionnaire, she also talked about wanting something pretty minimal. And so I started to play with maybe ways that this OB could become extracted or like abstracted into more of just a geometric symbol that's kind of like a stack of rocks or something that just feels symmetrical and calm. And then playing with a couple other ideas, sort of layering and more expressive typography and stuff. But that's like as far as I sort of go to get started. And then I thought I could kind of just dive in. So basically, I'm pretty like messy when I work in this type of way, but I think when I was discussing inspiration with my client, a lot of the examples she provided were actually like very minimal. I think that's the case with a lot of beauty brands. You can kind of go like really simple, or you can go much more expressive. And I think a lot of these like younger brands are going more expressive, but considering her clientele, she wants to see one direction that's like pretty sort of traditional, I would say. So I am picking like pretty classic typefaces here. And at this point, I'm not really looking a ton at the like details. I'm just really like playing with type and trying to get, start to look at some different typefaces to see like if I'm inspired by any of the shapes of anything or kind of how things are starting to work. And I think in these like simple cases, a lot of times you can get away with using like a geometric sans serif. And basically there are like a million versions of something like this, but yeah, I like to sort of start by just looking at a bunch of kind of type examples. And this is starting with something like Futura, which is super classic and very like more hard edged. It just like feels a little bit elevated. I often like to sort of track out all caps. I think it just feels a little bit more elevated that way. It's more breathing room sort of.
Yeah.
And then kind of looking potentially into some with like a little bit more personality that are still like in that. So this typeface is actually like super crazy when you start to use it, but potentially looking at some that have like a little bit more personality, even though they are still very geometric. And sometimes like when I'm starting to do typographic research, I wanted to show this site that I really like. It's called Typewolf, and some of you may be familiar with it.
Love Typewolf.
Yeah, it's great. So there's not like a search function, which is my only complaint about it. But basically, if you Google like any font and Typewolf, it pulls up this page and it sort of gives you like similar fonts. And I see that for Futura, they actually have even more resources, but often they'll also give you like the closest match on Adobe fonts. So in this case, they have Futura, but if it's like a weirder typeface, you can kind of click through and get like one step and one step more removed if I'm looking for something that maybe feels a little bit more unique. I'm kind of intrigued by this article that's like top 10 alternatives to Futura. So in here, I think that there might be like some things to explore, like Avant-Garde. That's one that I just actually tried here. And again, like at this point, I'm not that worried about making things look super nice or like tightening it up. I really like to work in this way where I'm creating a lot of different designs at first and looking at a lot of different things. And then I kind of see what sticks. And often like if I'm looking at type in isolation like this, it won't happen until later that I realize sort of what pairs with what, you know?
Sure, yeah. Everyone loves your sketches.
Oh my gosh.
And then Shani asks, do you give the questionnaire to your client and then follow up if you have questions, or do you chat with the client and fill in the questionnaire as you go?
That's a great question. I think that a lot of times clients need like a little bit of time to think about the responses. So sometimes like it can really depend on the client. If you think that they're going to be great on the phone, I find that if I'm like, a lot of times I prefer to give it in advance and have them fill it out and send it to me. And then I have like a kickoff call where we walk through it and I'm able to sort of like interrogate things that they're thinking about or ask like deeper questions, because the point of that really is not to get like all the answers. It's to sort of like have them start to think about it and have them get in the headspace where they're starting to think about like their target audience and their competitive landscape and their business plan and things that will inform the visual direction. But I'm usually not asking them like, you know, what typeface do you want to use? Because that's kind of my job. So usually I send it in advance, and then I would have a call with them to like go through it, if that answers the question.
Yeah. And is that usually once they've already booked you and you're working with them, or is that, do you also do something similar before you book with them?
That's a great question. I'm kind of against doing free work. So I try not to. I do it for my friends and stuff.
Sure.
But basically like I would have an intro call with the client before they would even see this questionnaire. And we've kind of talked through my overall process and like my design philosophy and what they're looking for and the budget and the timeline. And we're making sure like everything is a good fit. And then at that point, when we've already sort of signed the contract for the project, that's when I send the questionnaire.
Yeah, that makes sense. Really quick, do you want to touch on how you are going and like removing strokes in the letters and all of that, just so everyone can know the shortcuts that you're using?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I know a lot of, I've been doing this for quite some time, so I use a lot of shortcuts. Basically,
yeah, shortcuts are the best.
If you have like a type that's live, so right now I can make edits to this. I usually try to keep a version of this to the side just in case I want to modify it in the future. But if you go to type and create outlines, that'll turn all the type into a live path. And then I'm just basically going in. So now it's just like a path that you would use with the pen tool. I like to ungroup it, which is like Command-Shift-G basically, but then I can select one letter at a time.
Yeah.
And now I can go in with this sort of direct selection tool, which just selects like one point, and I can kind of like mess with the letters or like the specific points, like delete some, you know, maybe I think this is actually kind of cool, so I'll like keep it on the side for later. And then I'm going in with the pen tool to sort of like rejoin these paths. You can also do a lot in here with the Pathfinder tool. So like if I, for example, wanted to do this a different way and like cut out this section, I could create this shape and then kind of cut out from the top of it.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So sometimes I feel like when you're working with something simple like this, it can kind of help to like modify it in some way just to make it a little bit more, you know, I probably wouldn't do, this is a little nuts, I probably wouldn't do all of these things together, but I find that like working in this, it's almost like digital sketching where I'm just starting to notice like the relationships between some of these forms and looking for places to kind of modify it as I go.
Yeah. Yortima was asking, how do you decide whether an icon or a word mark will work better for the brands?
That's a great question. That's usually something that I try to talk about in the in my questionnaire. Often the client like doesn't have language for it, but I'll talk to them about like what are the most important touch points of this brand, or like where do you think it's used, or when we talk about like if they, you know, if they're referencing brands that they like or competition, I'll try to talk to them specifically about what they like about them, and then kind of use that to inform, because like they might not know what a word mark is or what a symbol is, but I think often in their examples or when they're like, I really need to use it on social media and I'm going to need like an icon to use on social media, that to me is sort of like, okay, well, there's probably going to need to be like some sort of symbol element, even if it's just like an O or a monogram or something with this, because, you know, this is going to get pretty small when it's like in a tiny icon.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of up to you. I think like sometimes the client has an opinion and it'll come out in that questionnaire, but I think it's up to you to recommend like what might be better for the client. And a lot of times,
you're the
like,
expert.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the industry too will dictate it a little bit. Like, I know this is going to need a word mark, even if it's just type. And I'm really interested in some of these symbol elements, but I think they might actually be sort of secondary to whatever this thing is, or they might be used like in tandem.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Justin asked, Ben, how long did it take you to memorize all these shortcuts?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm learning new ones all the time, where I'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I have been doing this thing for years the wrong way, or like a different way, and I could have saved myself hours. But I graduated from school in 2010, and I guess like I started using Illustrator before before college, but didn't really know, like I wasn't using it in this way. So I would say that like, you know, it's years of knowledge, but some of this stuff I like learned as I was preparing for this. So
sure. Yeah. Always learning. And I mean, it's always being updated too. So always new tools and things that you can learn. Fran says, OMG, Ben is my branding hero. And then Alexa says, hi, Ben.
That's my client.
Yes,
So she's
hello.
here. Don't judge me too hard. We can do more revisions.
Trish asked, what's that tool that flashes with the circle? I
That
think
flashes with the
there was
circle.
a circle that was popping up
Oh, that was
earlier.
just my, I use like a Wacom tablet, and
Yes.
that's like I accidentally hit a button on it. So it's
So that was your
not an
tablet.
Illustrator tool.
Yeah. Do you typically use a tablet when you're designing?
I do when I'm doing things with like the pen tool, or if I'm doing
Mhm.
photo retouching or something that requires like more control or more of like
Yeah.
a hand drawn or like a painterly thing. But when I'm doing like work in design or like layout or something, I usually
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. Makes sense. If you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure to hop over to Behance, behance.net/Adobe Live, so that we can see your questions and comments in the chat. Because if you leave comments on YouTube or questions, we won't be able to see them, and we want to make sure that we can answer all of them. So come on over to Behance, and then make sure to keep working on the Daily Creative Challenge. The challenge for today is to enhance a photograph using vector graphics. So really excited to see what you guys make. And then Ben will be offering some feedback in a little bit. So make sure you submit. The information for the challenge is right above the chat in the challenge tab.
So now I'm kind of starting to explore some of these like kind of stacking like OB like stones type of
Yeah.
idea. It's sort of this like abstract OB monogram. I feel like this to me is a little bit, oh, there's that circle again. This to me is a little bit more interesting because it's more abstract and like simple and geometric than some of these ones where I was like being really literal with the O and the B. So I'm just sort of starting to play with this element, and like, I don't know if people saw what I was doing before, but similar to like how you can transform a whole shape. If you select this tool, you can like transform an individual element. So I kind of like scaled this point just like 125% or something, and it kind of rounded out that curve in a way where I can control it evenly. You can also use like the scale tool or whatever, but then I can kind of control it on both sides.
Cool. Matthias is asking about tips for using a grid when you're making a logo. Is it necessary to use a grid like this?
No, not necessarily. I think it depends on like the type of, like if you want something that's more freeform, no. I love this like smart guides feature, which is what's like popping up in pink here. It kind of like lets you align to other things. And similarly, like this snap to point thing means that when I'm dragging around, like this will lock to this anchor point exactly. I don't think a grid is always necessary at this stage. I mean, if you look at my work, a lot of it is kind of like locked up to itself or kind of geometric in a way. And I think for something like this, a grid makes a lot of sense. And then like later on when I'm pairing type with like a word mark component with a symbol component, often I want them to have some sort of relationship to each other. So I find myself just from a lot of experiences where I like designed something and then it didn't really work on a grid or with type at the end. Like I feel like it's easier to sort of start on a grid as long as it's not making it feel too rigid. And then kind of move away from it. But no, it's not necessary. I would say if you're doing something that's more illustrative or has like varying line widths or something that is a little bit less, like this concept is all about geometric purity, I would say. So
yeah.
In this case, I'm like grid all the way.
That makes sense. Jenny's asking, what tablet are you using and do you recommend it? I was looking into it and there's so many different tablets out there.
There are a lot. Am I allowed to make product recommendations on this?
Yeah, I think as long as they're not, Adobe competition, which I don't think a tablet would be.
No. So I use a Wacom tablet. I think mine is Intuos Pro or something. It's like a couple years old. They have a bunch of different sizes. It is a more expensive one. I've heard good things about like the bamboo, which is kind of the more entry level version. But really, I think to get started, like anything kind of works. And I also know some people who like use an iPad, which I haven't kind of fully explored yet. But yeah, that's the one that I have. I've just had it since it was the one that I got at when I used to have a full-time job like 6 years ago or something. So that's what I have kept using.
Cool. Carrie's asking, how do you talk clients out of a bad idea?
That's tough. You kind of have to, I think I think honestly, all of those types of conversations require a lot of pre-work to kind of set yourself up as the expert and as the person to trust. So if you've if you've done all this strategic work and you're like justifying your decisions based on that, it's much easier to sort of say like, here's the recommendation that I would make, and here's why. And it's based on these things that we talked about, like in our kickoff call, in the questionnaire, based on like what other brands in the space are doing. And I feel like if you have if it's not just like, I prefer this one, or to me, like this is my visual preference, if it's actually backed up by something that you have, I don't know why this isn't selecting, something that you've agreed on or talked about. And then I think like my approach is pretty flexible. So if I truly think it's a bad decision, I will try to talk the client out of it. But this is kind of how I work. My art boards become crazy because I'm always like saving a version of things. If it's a truly bad decision, or if you I think you just kind of have to choose where you're going to put a stake in the ground and where it's what battles are like worth it to you. So a lot of times like clients will have really strong opinions on color, for example. It's like a very polarizing thing.
Yeah.
And that I feel like is one that I don't often like push back that hard on. But if it's like a type decision or something that I feel like isn't going to scale well or isn't going to be like usable, like I think if you can, basically if you can justify it with other reasons other than like personal preference, I feel like that's the way to go, and kind of like pick and choose. You can't push back on everything.
Yeah, for sure. You can a lot of times tell if a client is going to be very opinionated in the initial conversations too, and then kind of plan for it or like charge accordingly if you know there's going to be a lot of iterations.
Yeah, that's true. I should do that.
Isaac is asking if you're able to explain some of these moves as you're doing them, which is hard because you're also trying to answer questions. So if you want to touch on what you kind of were just doing.
What I just did. Yeah. I'm creating these shapes, which you saw me do earlier, and they're just on the grid. And I do a lot of this like holding option. When you click and drag, it creates like, basically right now I'm holding option and shift, and it creates like a duplicate. So that's what I'm doing as I'm like working along. And it's why my files end up looking a little chaotic in this phase. But right now I just want to sort of like create a lot of iteration so that I can be like, oh, actually I'm really into this or this. I'm like seeing kind of that OB thing. And then over here, right now I have this, this is like how I'm controlling the stroke width. So that's just in window stroke. You can also control like if it's where it's aligning to, and if it's a dashed line and stuff. And then again, similar to like the type thing that I showed earlier, if right now this is a path. So if I there are cases where you want it to be a live shape, basically. So similar to how I outlined the type before, if you go to object path, outline stroke, now these are solid paths. And I'm using this Pathfinder tool, which is under Window Pathfinder. I think that this is one of the most, to me, like powerful tools in Illustrator, especially for logo design. It's sort of, it has all these functions that let you combine and kind of subtract out different shapes. And so what I did over here is I basically just outlined this shape so it was solid, and then I used this merge or unite tool. So now it's all one shape.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you select with like this direct selection tool, right now all these points are selected. When you have individual points selected, it shows you this like corner radius tool. So if you want to like round out parts of your design, you can kind of do that. And sometimes that makes it feel a little bit less like, I guess, like mono line weight icon style. So you can do it to just like individual points too if you want to. It's also a good way to get, like that's kind of cool. Although it's starting to look a little bit like a car symbol or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can kind of, it's a good way to get like irregular corners to be rounded too. So if I have a shape like this and I want to round these out, it'll kind of create a perfectly circular corner, even though these are like on an angle, which is sometimes annoying to do.
Yeah, super useful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dylan asks, how many initial logo concepts do you typically send to clients? Are you just showing the logo or mocking them up in various applications as well?
Great question. I never just show the logo. I feel like it's really hard for clients to judge it in isolation, or they're like really swayed by certain things about it that are actually quite like, they don't know what's changeable and what's not, like what's an easy change and what's not. So I like to show, I usually show 3 concepts in round 1. So I do like a ton of exploration kind of internally, like in a file like this. And then I'll show in like my round 1 presentation, I'll show 3, oh my gosh. I will show 3 concepts. I don't know what I just did. And with applications, and they're not like real, they're not what will end up being like the business card or something, but it's really just to show the client, like, so they can start to imagine what that expanded visual world looks like. And then if those are part of the real project, then I kind of do that actually like after the rest of the branding.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, they don't know. It's hard for them to picture in real life. So
totally.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
I'm like very excited. So you start, not that you're trying to like trick them, but you end up sort of, it becomes easier for them to pick because you start like imagining it in the next phase of its existence instead of picking apart like, oh, I actually don't like the curving of that part.
Yeah. Yeah, and giving them context, which is always good.
Yeah. So
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Vanessa says, love this. And then Susan says, I have a Wacom Intuos tablet and a XP Pen tablet. The newer tablets have more features. Going back to that.
There you go.
Conversation. And then Vanessa says, going back to the clients who don't listen to you. So what do you do when the clients still don't listen after you've given them like your reasoning?
I would say like I'm very flexible. It's like part of the way that I work. And I think that I truly believe that kind of a lot of my projects have become better because of the client feedback. So I think you get better at that. You get better at those conversations and heading those conversations off earlier. But sometimes like at the end of the day, that is the client. And if they kind of want it a certain way, they're the one who's paying for it. And it's not like a personal art project. So I try to make the best case for it that I can and try to put it in the context of their business and why I think it's the best decision. But ultimately it is their decision. Like they're the one who's going to have a successful business or not, sort of based on the work. And so ultimately like it's on them. And if you have a version you like better, I feel like it's totally fine to like put that in your portfolio. You know, it depends on the client. Some clients might not be open to that, but I think for like display purposes, you should like put the work that you would recommend in your portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that mindset though, that the client working with the client and that kind of collaboration with them makes your work better instead of the attitude that like I always know best and like kind of I feel like that's a humble like mindset and that's a great way to view like working with a client.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sure
mean,
they
I think
appreciate that.
I try. It's taken me a while to
Sure.
reach that.
Yeah.
I don't always act like that or haven't in the past. But yeah, I think like ultimately the client is really the expert in their business and they
Sure.
understand their customer and like
Yeah.
how their business works more than you do. And sometimes like there have been decisions where I'm like, all right, if that's what you really want to do, I will do it. And then it ends up working out really well for
Yeah.
them. And so I've kind of learned to like push it as far as I can, but then not worry about it too much, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Axel asked, do you know of any online site where you can sell logos? What is your opinion of these sites? Do they work or do they just steal ideas?
Wow, that's a heavy one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know that there are sites like that. I don't know what they are. I think you can, I don't know what they are, but
Yeah.
basically the way that I have set up my business, I guess like Squarespace for a while had a version of that. They had like Squarespace logos and you could kind of pick an icon and pick a typeface and it would generate it for you or something. I think that, I don't know, the way that I've set up my business, I'm not really threatened by that because I'm working with people at a higher price point and a more sort of custom
Yeah.
product than anything that those can generate. And I think it's
Hmm.
kind of a waste of my time and energy to be concerned about like, can a computer design a better logo than I
Yeah.
can? And I think that that is also why I really believe in thinking about branding more holistically. So to
Hmm.
like, yes, I'm designing a logo right now and that's kind of where I'm starting, but it's also a lot about this like strategic foundation work. It's a lot about like things that are kind of intuitive and things that are not like, I prefer things that are much less literal. That's something that I say to my students all the time. So even though I'm kind of doing a monogram here, it's not just like I'm not taking a B from a typeface. I'm taking an O from a
Right.
typeface, combining them.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think like, yes, they exist. You know, I guess they are taking work away from some people, but I also think that a client who is like at the place financially or mindset wise where they want to use a service like that, they might not end up being like a great client to be working with. Or
Yeah.
if they're
It's
happy
very
with like
true.
a clip art logo, you know,
Yeah.
it might not be something that you want to put in your portfolio or whatever anyway.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's what I think about that.
I agree. David asks, hi Ben, when you're in this experimental phase, how often do you look back to your references or other inspiration? Also, you look amazing.
Thanks. I try to, so like I do a fair amount of, normally I do some sort of like inspiration pulling and I go back to it occasionally, like often in this type of file, I'll actually have dragged in
Right.
some other visual references that I'm looking at. I feel like for the logo part and for the type part, I try not to look too much at like graphic design references. I'm looking more for like photography or like things that are tangential to what I'm working on because I'm kind
Right.
of nervous about even subconsciously like affecting what I'm
Because once
doing.
you
So
look,
I'm,
it's like stuck in your brain, even if you
yeah.
don't look at it again.
And I've had times where I end up accidentally like designing something and then I look back at it later or I look back at my inspiration. I'm like, oh shoot, that's like, that's where that came from. It's like very close, like undeniably close to that thing. So
Yeah.
I look back at like my sketches a lot and sometimes I'll look at the inspiration from the client, but I feel like in this phase, I try not to too much. It's more like when I get to like color palette, I reference a lot, or like a lot of other, like I'll look at artwork or I'll look at photography,
Sure.
or like I'll look at details of other things, but less like I like this logo. I'm trying to recreate this
Mm-hmm.
logo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say like I just am a little bit cautious about that type of thing. Okay.
Yeah, that's good. I think looking at other fields is no matter what field you're working in, I think that is a great place to get inspiration where it's not going to be copying as much. Like I work mostly in photography and we look at graphic design and architecture
Yeah,
and all the time because it's like a great place to pull inspiration, but it's not going to be us looking at someone else's photo and then copying
totally.
aspects of it. It'll be translated into photography, which will be totally different. So,
Yeah, and
yeah,
I
I think that's
think
great
like
advice.
I look at like I follow other design firms and I look at
Sure.
work, but I try to make it less specific like to the project.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess another resource that I should share is this like a lot of times historical inspiration I think is a really good place
Yeah.
to
Mm-hmm.
look. And Elizabeth Goodspeed, who has been on this
Yes.
before.
Yes, I hosted her. She's
Oh yeah,
amazing. I
she's the
love
best.
her. Yeah.
Um, I'm just going to show everyone how to get here. But
Yes.
if you go to her website, there might be an easier way to get here. But she has this really extensive Google Doc of like archive resources.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go down here, there are all sorts of like open source or not open source all the time, but like artwork or like single topic. Like I was just the other day looking at like there's this database of like Italian matchbooks from like the 50s.
Oh, that's
Like
so
often
cool.
they have
Yeah.
like the coolest, weirdest, yeah, here like Italian razors, I think is what I was looking at for another project. And often I feel like there's maybe a detail from something like this that you can pick up and put in one of your projects or
Mm-hmm.
be like really
Mm-hmm.
inspired by like one letter from something.
Sure.
And it's a bit like less. Yeah, so these are all the A's of these like razor boxes from Italy.
That's so
Um,
cool. Wow.
and yeah, so there's like a ton of stuff in here. If you just Google or like if you look up Elizabeth Goodspeed and this
Mm-hmm.
project is called Casual Archivist, but there's a ton of stuff in here. I feel like that type of inspiration or like books or other places are a little bit safer just to avoid that like accidental imitation.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, you guys can watch the replay of her streams too if you want to see. She talks a lot about how she uses those sources as inspiration. So make sure to go watch that replay if you want. I'm sure if you Google Elizabeth Goodspeed Adobe Live, it'll come up.
All right,
Cool.
I should move away from this concept because I've been looking at circles for a long time.
Dylan asks, how many applications are you doing with those 3 logo concepts? Are you just doing one mockup application or does it vary based on the project?
It definitely varies based on the project. I hope to get into that a little bit tomorrow, but basically I do, it's always like a couple. So I think, because really what I'm trying to communicate in that phase is like nothing here is final. It's really just to show you, like start to imagine the rest of this kind of world.
Yeah.
So often I will show, like it really depends on the client. If it's a digital client, I may not need to show like a business card.
Sure.
If it's if it's for this client, for example, I probably won't get through all of this tomorrow, but I imagine that for a project like this, I would mock up like a business card, some sort of like services list or gift card. Like it's the most important touch points I would say are like in the spa or like on the website and Instagram, and then like maybe sort of takeaway style collateral. So I think I would probably at least mock up those things that are the most important. So like business card, postcard, some idea of like what the art direction style will be if there's like photography or illustration, and then probably like a website splash page or an Instagram feed. I would say like 3 is probably the minimum, but like I just did a restaurant branding project, and that was like a much bigger project and they had a lot more eventual collateral needs. So I showed
Sure.
some like packaging and I showed some like delivery kind of stuff because those were important. So I change it up based on what's important to the client, what I think will get them excited. And if I do it right, it does end up saving me work down the road.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Let me see. Oh, Justin asked, Ben, what's a dream client for you right now?
That's a great question. I used to say that I really wanted to, and this is still true, but I really like these projects where sort of branding meets spatial and like experiential components. I just think there's so many fun like details and ways to kind of surprise and delight people that you have when it's a physical space. So I used to really want to do a lot of work in hospitality spaces. Like I would love to brand a hotel or work on another restaurant and work in a way where I get to collaborate with kind of like an interior design team. So maybe I'm not doing the design, but if there's like graphic elements in the space, or we collaborate on the color palette and the finishes, I think that would be really kind of a full like immersive brand experience. Now in the current climate, I would say like I'm not really pursuing hospitality clients.
Sure.
But my work has become much more sort of digital.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah, I do like I do still enjoy print design and kind of physical design. So I would say in general, like projects with an element of that are like kind of like small to medium, like boutique-y style projects in that area are really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so fun because then it's like, I don't know, tangible more so than just on the screen. It's something that you can hold and touch and be inside and experience.
And a lot of times like those places will have swag or they'll have like other things that you can like make really, it isn't just like putting the logo on stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We have some questions about getting clients. So Vanessa asked, where do you get your clients? And then Khalid asked, what suggestions do you have for new grads to get clients?
That is a tough one. I think that ultimately like graphic design is a service business. So a lot of it is like word of mouth and referrals. Like that was true when I started and it's still true today. And like I don't know, like I've put a lot of, I'm always working on updating my website. It's like super out of date and updating my portfolio, but I feel like people don't even find it until they have a personal referral or they're like, someone knows about me. So I think the best way to find clients is to like, I hate the word networking and the idea of networking, but your goal should sort of be to kind of be friends with, or at least know a lot of people who are especially outside of graphic design.
Yes.
Because, and people who are starting businesses and doing some of those other, or have access to some other projects, because sometimes I'll refer, like if I'm too busy, I'll refer, or the project is too big or too small, I'll refer it to other people. But often my best referrals come from like, if it's a great project, someone will probably like take it for themselves.
Yeah.
Often my like bigger projects or better projects come from people I know who are not in design or who I've worked with in like my first jobs, who are now at a level where they are the people deciding who gets hired for the project, or they're starting their own businesses. So I would say like it took me many years to get to this point where I feel like my network is big enough where it's sort of work is reliably coming in. But it is hard I know a lot of people want to sort of start their own businesses right away. I definitely wasn't ready to do something like that just because I wouldn't have had the work to support it. I worked for a lot of years on the side. But I guess I forget who asked, but I think like if you are just starting out and you're trying to get work, like putting it out there that you're available for work, what you're interested in, even like what I just talked about, like the type of project, because your goal should be that like if I know you and I hear of some project, I'm going to be like, oh, I should hire like Elle for that. I know she
Yeah.
really wants to work on this type of project,
Yeah.
or like she's available.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a way to do it in a very natural way. I don't think you need
Totally.
to be like harassing people or anything, but you
Yeah.
can also like reach out to people that you would want to work with or propose projects to people. And then the other thing that I'll say, sorry, it's hard to do this when I'm talking.
I know.
The other thing that I would say is like, if you, I totally lost my train of thought, but I think, yeah, I don't know what I was going to say.
Yeah, no, those are all great tips. I think networking outside of your field is great. We've had designers that we know give us a lot of photography projects and like vice versa. And a lot of our clients will be like, hey, do you know of a graphic designer? They'll ask if we do branding and we don't, so we can refer to designers that we know. So networking outside your field is great advice. And
I guess the other thing that I was going to say, I just remembered, a lot of times, and this is like a little bit frustrating sometimes, but I really believe that like the type of work that you show in your portfolio is the type of work that you get, because like I'm a visual thinker.
Yeah.
A lot of people watching are probably visual thinkers, but for many clients who don't work in like a visually creative field, they really need to see that you can execute a project sort of like theirs, not exactly like theirs, but kind of like, you know, maybe it's like a project in the luxury market, or it's a project that has an e-commerce website component. And even though you might know that you're capable of doing a project like that, it's hard for a client to maybe imagine it. So
sure.
I think if you have to do some work, like doing some self-initiated projects or whatever to prove that you can do that type of project and put it in your portfolio, then it sort of increases the likelihood that you'll get hired for that type of work. And that is like the type of free work that I do support, are sort of those self-initiated projects.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. I know you've moved on from it, but I feel like people might be interested to know how you made the wavy lines in those shapes that you just did.
Yeah.
If you want to jump back to that for a second.
So if you have any path or like any shape, honestly, like I'll do it to both of these at once so you can see. It's in effects, and it's in, what is it under? Distort and transform.
Yes.
And there are a lot of things in here that I think are kind of like secret tricks that I use to like make something a little bit less perfect. So in this case, like I might actually end up doing this in a different way if this is the direction that I end up going with. But you can kind of pick, like, this is kind of the distance from the path that it's distorting itself. That's kind of cool.
That is kind of cool.
And then this, I just picked smooth instead of, this is really cool. Maybe this is the logo.
I know.
So I just did that on, that is so weird. I just did that on all of these straight lines. If I was actually doing this type of project, I might, it kind of bugs me that they're like distorting the same way, but the distance between these lines is actually not the same. So if I was actually doing this, I might expand this path, which now this is, it no longer has that effect applied to it. It's just, those are all points.
Yeah.
And then you can do this like offset path tool. Again, like this is where your grid does kind of become important.
Yeah.
To get something that, I would have to fudge with this, but to get something where it's actually like even spacing around. But yeah, that's how I did the zigzag.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, another, like, I guess while I'm revealing all my secrets, another thing outside of that rounding corners that I sometimes do is apply like a roughen effect, which is in that same panel. And again, a lot of these effects, it's like if you ever used Liquify in Photoshop when you were younger or now, a lot of these effects like look crazy if they're on large settings, but if you want to add like a super subtle texture that sort of keeps this as a vector object, sometimes I will like add a really small roughen thing to this that kind of gives it like a kind of a
grungy or like,
yeah, it's like a stamp
organic.
or something.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to do that for, like, I really think that for this, whatever I end up going with in this direction, I want it to be like cleaner.
Yeah.
But if it was maybe a more like organic-y brand, or if I wanted it to sort of look like it was hand applied or something, then I might, you know, do something more, textured, or give it a little bit more like, yeah.
Love that. Thank you. All the tips and tricks.
Got a lot of them.
What's your advice for beginners who are just starting to get into professional freelance designing?
I think that my biggest advice would be to just like keep going, like keep making work. And I think a lot of times it's really easy to fall into this like comparison trap where you are looking at all this amazing work that people are doing or that gets featured, or people who have 1 million Instagram followers or whatever. And it's really easy to be like, I'll never get there. Or my work doesn't look like that, or I don't have clients like that. And I think what is, sorry, I'm like trying to think of typefaces
and answer
a question. I would say just like, you kind of have to push through it. There's this, it's a little bit cliche, but there's this like Ira Glass.
Yes, I was just thinking of that when you were talking. Yeah.
That I really like. I always share it with my students because I remember seeing it as a young designer. It's from his like on storytelling. He was, I think it's like through, I'll try to find it. I'm not going to play it, but it should be on YouTube. It's this part. And basically what he says is like, when you start out, you have great taste, which is like what gets you into the game. And it can be frustrating because you recognize that there's the gap between the work you're producing and your taste level.
Yeah.
And the most important thing is to just like push through it. And the way that you do that is like making a lot of work. Like that's the only way that you sort of learn how to use all these tools, so you can, because I think like even when I was first starting, like I would sketch things and I would be like, I don't know how to get this to look like that on the computer. I would be like live tracing it or whatever, which is also fine if that's how you want to design. But I think the way that you get better is really just creating a lot of work and realizing that like, I mean, don't tell my clients this, but like not every project is going to like needs to be your best work if you're just constantly trying to improve and learn new things. And eventually you'll reach a place where like you kind of, you know, some of that stuff will come naturally.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to explain. I feel like I don't want to spend too long on any one concept today.
Okay.
So basically, I think that there's like something interesting in this like simple geometric symbol. Sorry, I just had another idea. And then like maybe paired with some sort of simple geometric all caps tracked out typeface. So I kind of want to, just because we have like only 2 hours, keep going here. And another direction that I want to look at is something that's like lowercase and has kind of feels a bit like fresher and younger, but still elevated. So I'm looking at typefaces here that have a little bit of like, I hate classifying type as like, or anything really as feminine and masculine, but but they kind of have a little bit of a, like a curvy kind of like feel to them. You could even, if you're talking to a client, you could even be like, you know, it's kind of like, it feels a little bit more natural, like a body, it feels rounded.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's still kind of in this sans serif world, and it's not getting kind of super, you know, like typefaces like this, which I think are really beautiful, but they are a little bit more, they feel a little bit more formal or like overtly feminine.
Yeah.
Where this is like a little bit quieter, but still has some of that kind of rounding to it. So just trying to look for a balance, I guess, of this like kind of subtle curvy quality, but also still kind of clean.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
It's so great doing this remote because I can actually scroll through the chat when we're in the in the studio. It's like if a question goes away, I can't see it anymore. So this is great. Shani asks, what's your education background in design, and what do you feel helped you learn the most regarding what you do today? Any recommendations or resources for education?
For sure. I went to school in Madison, Wisconsin, and I studied design and business, but it's not like a super, you know, it was an okay design program, but it's a big public research school. So I didn't go to really like art school per se. And I studied graphic design, but really there it's just sort of a concentration in design within the art department. I didn't have, now I'm friends, you know, now I live in New York. I'm friends with a lot of people who went to RISD and MICA and SVA, and, you know, I teach at Parsons. And I think that that's not really what my education looked like, where I was taking like typography 1, typography 2, typography 3, like brand design, you know, it's kind of like graphic design 1. But yeah, so I studied design. I also like interned when I was a student at a couple different places. I interned at like the Alumni Association, and I interned at Trek Bikes for a summer. I was in Madison, Wisconsin. And then I interned at the Contemporary Art Museum, and all that work, like none of it was the most exciting work that I have ever done, but I would say I learned just as much, if not more, on those jobs as I did in the classroom. And I really like this typeface. I learned just as much there as I did in the classroom. And I think that when you start to do real world projects like that, it really is where you can like take a lot of this stuff that is like more theoretical from the classroom, or like teaches you how to think or teaches you how to use the tools, and then kind of learn, you can kind of see what the day-to-day job is like and see how some of these tools are actually applied, even if it's just like designing a flyer or whatever. So yeah, that's my education background. Then I moved to Chicago. I participated in this kind of sleepaway design camp at Firebelly Design, which is this like 10-day program called Camp Firebelly that I don't know if they run it anymore, but after that, I was like one of 10 kind of designers from all over the country that got picked to do that. And I kind of had applied randomly to it. And I, after that, was offered an internship there. And that is really what I credit with like kind of setting me on the, kind of setting the trajectory for my career, because there I worked with like really talented people, and the projects were really interesting. And I, you know, wasn't doing like the most, you know, I was doing lower level work, but I was able to interact with clients and see how everyone worked. And people were really generous with their time and feedback and everything. So there I learned so much about how, like what it's like to work at a studio, and what it's like to do branding, and what it's like to have clients and everything. And so that I would say that like in my first jobs, and even, you know, in any job I've had, I kind of am trying to learn as much as I can about like not just design, but kind of how their business works, or you know, how they work with clients and take things away. I feel like if you're looking for that stuff, you can really learn something from anywhere, even if you're currently in a job that you like don't you don't love or is not what you ultimately want to be doing.
Yeah. Do you feel like your business, you said you studied business too?
Yeah.
Do you feel like that has helped you? Like, would you recommend that for someone who's doing freelance, or was that more generalized?
I think I did it because I wasn't quite sure that I totally wanted to do design.
Sure.
So I don't think it's like, or maybe it was just to make my parents, stop bugging me about what I was going
Yeah.
to do. But I think that it definitely helps me. But like some other classes, like I took some marketing classes and things that have really helped me, especially in like speaking to clients or
Right.
like, or when I work with larger clients where I am working with like a marketing department. And like also when you run your own business, kind of you're the accountant and
Yeah, you're
bookkeeper and
everything.
everything. So like I
Yeah.
did take like accounting classes. I'm not an expert, but I can like run my own QuickBooks, for example.
That's
So
great. Yeah.
that is definitely like, I don't think it's required. It is a plus.
Sure.
But even that stuff, I'm still like learning a lot about. I just this past spring took a like small business for growth class with Holly Howard.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's called From Artisan to Entrepreneur. It's like a really cool class. It was with a lot of other small business owners, some like service-based businesses, some product businesses. And I'm still like, I think a lot of times, like, especially independent entrepreneurs, like fall into this trap of just doing the day-to-day work. And I felt like her class was really helpful because it started to make me think a bit more about like the longer term goals or like how to,
Sure.
because I have to do all the client work and like focus on the goals for the business. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it helped, but not required,
Yeah. Yeah. Taylor asked, "Do you think an icon is a necessary component in a logo, or will typography only suffice?"
Good question. I was just talking to my studio mate about this the other day. It really, like, I think I answered kind of like, how do you decide between a word mark and an icon before? And I think it really depends on the client. I think that a lot of like, in some cases, a word mark only is totally fine. I think a lot of the time these days, there are needs where you might need to do sort of an icon, especially for social media or something. So even if the like icon is a version of the word mark that works in a square or a circle, I think that like you'll kind of need to think about both. I think usually there's never a case where I think like you can only do an icon, So even like, I guess if it's an app or something, that glyph becomes much more important than the word mark potentially, because it's like what you click on in the home screen and you always see the name next to it. But I think it's kind of nice when brand systems like have both and you can kind of use them more flexibly. So even if I go with a direction like this where I'm just, in this case, I haven't even modified this typeface, but I think it has kind of the characteristics that I'm looking for. But I would say that even if you're just doing a word mark, you're kind of making all those decisions and you're setting like these, the letting and the tracking and the kerning. And I'll probably go in here if I end up going in this direction. And sometimes I do this to make sure it's like visually balanced and kind of kern things around. And there'll probably be like this sort of stacked version, but I would imagine that in this system, giving this to this client, I would also create a horizontal version. And again, I'm like setting all of those things. So when I hand this off, it's less of a risk that they'll like misuse it. Even though that always kind of happens a bit. But I don't think that it's not that like one is better than the other. It just kind of depends on the project and the client, like, and what the most important applications are, what makes more sense, I think. I usually try to include both though. Like even if I go in this direction, I'm probably going to this typeface actually has a really crazy display version. It's like super weird. But
oh, that's kind of fun.
Yeah, so it has these like
wow, yeah.
really intense thicks and thins. And that's the other thing I would say, like it's a bit of a kind of potentially a cop out, but just like there are a lot of these just typefaces that are kind of display typefaces that have so much character built into them that anything you type in it kind of feels like a word mark automatically. So I might go in and modify this, or I might create a symbol that sort of pairs with this in a way where, you know, at least I feel like I'm not just using existing elements, although there is a lot of effort that goes into just that. So it's like a fine approach too.
Cool. Carrie asked if you would ever go back to an in-house art director designer gig, or are you going to be freelance forever?
Is that from you or from the chat?
From the chat, Carrie. Carrie asked.
I think about it sometimes. I think there are trade-offs to both. Like I've hopped back and forth a bit, and I think that that's one of the nice things about graphic design is it's like you really don't have to. It's not like you have to commit to one or the other. Like you can try freelancing or you can try full-time, and there are a lot of like kind of permalance or full-time freelance or contract gigs where you might be on site for a couple months at a time for a project that are almost like in-betweens. So to me, it's not really one or the other. Like I would consider it, but I will say that I love the flexibility and the autonomy of like working for myself. And I worked at a couple places. I've worked at a variety of places, but some of them were a little bit more hierarchical.
Sure.
And that was always frustrating to me. Like I really enjoy how in my current setup, I get to communicate like directly with the client or the decision maker. I get to present my own work. I get to control my own schedule. There are probably, I mean, this might change in the future, but depending on if you're like in-house or agency or at a startup or independent, there are definitely versions of that where you make more money than you might as an independent designer. But to me, that sort of control and flexibility over my life is really valuable. And I think
big pro.
Yeah, it would have to be like I would have to be really excited about the company or the opportunity to really think about giving that up. Although I will say, like in this sort of isolation and working remotely and everything, like, you know, some people's full-time jobs are starting to look a little bit more like my setup right now. So we will see.
Is your studio just you right now, or do you have other designers that you're working with?
I have a couple other, I work out of a shared workspace in Brooklyn, but it's like a big loft space, and there are a couple people are working from home, and we kind of do shifts. So it's
cool.
Yeah, it's like a big space, and we're kind of trying to keep things distant. But before, there are probably like 6 or 7 or 8 of us in here, kind of all from different, like the woman who runs the space, her name is Lisa Hedge. You should look her up. I'll show you her work. Great. She is with her business partner, Vanessa, their ensemble studio, and their work is very beautiful. You should check them out. But yeah, she runs the space, and then her boyfriend is an architect. We have some like remote full-time people in here. We have a copywriter, some digital designers. So I was working from home for a period of time, and I kind of felt like I was going a little stir crazy. And it's been really nice to have somewhere to be able to separate work from personal
Yeah, for sure.
stuff. Otherwise, I kind of am someone who can fall into working like all the time.
Yep, I'm the same way. It's nice to be able to leave or to like
Yeah.
go somewhere and get in the mindset of working and then to turn it off and
Yeah.
go home.
And there's also a fair amount of, I would say, like sort of cross-pollination, like creative idea exchanging that can happen in a shared space. And that's one of the things that I miss about working at larger companies, is that sort of collaboration. So I've found that working in a shared workspace is a nice way to kind of achieve parts of that.
Yeah.
I don't quite know what I'm creating here, but
it looks fun though.
Yeah, I had one of these sketches that was layering like all the letters from the logo on top of each other. And I'm kind of wondering if if I can find a version of this that creates something kind of weird, but accidentally interesting that can play off of these strange thick sentence that are happening in this typeface. So there's like the O, the Z, the E. Oh, there's not an M. I can add.
Oh yeah, some kind of M.
I don't know. I can figure it out. But I'm wondering if there is something I can do where where I can pick up on some of these strange shapes that are happening in this word mark.
We have about 13 minutes until the design feedback, so make sure you submit your enhanced photographs so that Ben can give some feedback, and looking forward to seeing what you guys make. And thanks for all your questions. You guys have been so awesome and like so engaged in submitting so many questions, and we're trying to get to them all. But poor Ben's like trying to design at the same time. Michael asked, so kind of, I guess you kind of maybe touched on this slightly in saying that like being around other creatives you can get ideas from, or like at least like bounce ideas off of, or kind of have that exchange. But Michael asked, as an independent creative, do you ever consult with other designers or creatives before submitting design drafts, or is everything solo until submitted to the client for feedback?
Yeah, I definitely show other people my work. I think like a lot of times it's really easy to fall into a trap where you are kind of working in a silo and you think something's great, but you haven't fully interrogated it, or there might be something different, or like, I mean, I think you can see here, like I like options. I've already like started to do. So sometimes I need to just sort of be like this or this. I've been looking at this for way too long, and usually it kind of doesn't.
Fresh eyes sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes I've reached a point where it doesn't even really matter at this stage, but I just need to move on. Maybe I should be polling the chat for that type of decision. But I find that I have like a small pool of people who are both graphic designers and not graphic designers, depending on what I need feedback on, that I will ask that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah.
Viola asked, how long does it typically take you to complete a project?
I work on a really big variety of projects, so it's hard to totally say, but for like a branding project, I would say that I usually tell clients in an intro call like 4 to 6 weeks for this like core brand phase, but that's kind of broken up, and I'm working on multiple projects at a time. So often that's like a week for the questionnaire and feedback, and then like 2 or 3 weeks for kind of initial exploration. So you're seeing like 2 hours of this today, but usually my files are like the whole artboard of just kind of versions of things like this before I really figure out what's working for me.
You don't usually design a logo in 2 hours?
Yeah. Not all the time, but
Yeah.
and then the applications are pretty time consuming, and putting together a presentation is pretty time consuming. So that like round one is definitely the longest time period. That's sort of like 3 weeks. And then I typically say like, a week or a week and a half for, I include up to 2 rounds of revisions usually in my process with clients. And so that in total is like 4 to 6 weeks, including time for them to give feedback. And then, and that's just for sort of the core brand. Then going into applications takes longer, especially if it's like a web development can take forever. So it kind of depends on the project, but for branding, that's what I typically tell people. You can do it faster, but I'm kind of someone who needs even time to like think about things before starting to design and like digest everything. So it's not all active time, but it's kind of just how I work the best.
Yeah, and time for communication with clients too, like you mentioned, like time for you have to account for like time for them to get back to you with feedback and all of that, because that can sometimes take longer than maybe you would think, or like,
totally.
I don't know. It's good to like keep that in mind when giving them final dates. Do you have any advice on how to practice and improve logo designs on our own?
I think just like similar to my answer before, you just have to do more of it. Often like I would say like when I'm looking at portfolios, or when I was teaching this class, or when I'm thinking about it, like a lot of I really believe that typography is like the solid sort of foundation of graphic design. And so if I think improving your type skills will like automatically improve your branding skills. But I would say like if you don't have, I think doing the work will sort of make you better at it, because if you work in this way where you're creating many different options, or even 3 different options, you're kind of starting to play with different styles, and starting to play with learn different tricks about how to do things. And I think it's really just by doing it. You can do like a practice project or do a logo for yourself or for your friend or something. But I think the only way to learn some of this stuff is just to do it.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And the more you do it, the easier things will become, or you're going to develop your style more, figure out more of the kind of projects you want to take on, the kind of clients you want as you're practicing. And the more, the better. Jade asked, do you have a project or a client that you had the most fun collaborating with? Who and what was the project? If you can share, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
Sometimes you can't.
I've been lucky. I've worked with a lot of great clients, and I think that's part of, you can't really, a lot of times it takes you a while to reach that place, because when you're just starting out, you kind of have to say yes to everything. But luckily I've reached a place where I have the opportunity to evaluate like client fit, or if I think it's going to be a good project, or if I vibe with the client. And so recently I've worked on a lot of projects where it's been really rewarding. I think my favorite ones are, a lot of my work is kind of, I would say, this like playful meets polished style. So I've had the most fun with clients where we like can lean into that a little bit. So for example, I did branding for my friend's podcast called Food for Thought. And it's this like,
that's fun.
My other friend, Michael George, who I believe was in the chat earlier, did photography for it. And we got to collaborate on a photo shoot for it. So it all has this like really ridiculous, irreverent attitude. And because it's these like 4 queer people, like queer guys in New York City, or now some of them in LA. And because the subject matter was this like highbrow, lowbrow thing, we got to also do that with the branding and also do that with the photography. So that was really fun. And then I would say most recently I worked on this, I think I showed it in the beginning, but I worked on this restaurant project, which obviously they couldn't launch a physical space, but they're doing kind of.
I love that photo.
Thanks. This is actually a stock photo.
Is it? It fits so well.
Thanks. A lot of times my
gorgeous.
Like eventually I hope to do a real photo shoot with these guys, but kind of in person isn't an option right now. But this is like a new Greek restaurant or Mediterranean restaurant in LA, and they're doing delivery now. But I kind of, this to me was very fun because it's this like, this is my favorite part. It's this kind of like fully realized brand system where there is that like word mark, and there's an icon, and there's a photo direction, and there's this pattern kind of treatment.
Like tile. It reminds me of like Mediterranean tile.
That's the point.
Love
so
it.
I'm glad to
you
hear
nailed
you say
it.
That. Thanks. But it's this very like eclectic. This is what I mean, I guess, by that sort of like, it's the playful, but it's still very like clean. And I'm thinking about this like larger brand world. And the clients were really passionate and enthusiastic about it. So that's like a very fun.
That always makes it more fun.
Yeah, totally. Just trying to see what I did not get to here.
Cool. You have about 4 minutes and we'll jump over to, but you'll probably have a few minutes at the end too. So yeah, I know it goes by fast, huh? Once you get going.
That's funny that someone asked about how long it takes because I feel like this initial process, I'll probably have to do a little bit of cleaning up on some of these tonight. Because I do, even based on the questions, I think it would be helpful to show the like application.
Yes,
process.
I think we'd all love to see that.
Yeah. Any last questions before?
We do have some more. Dylan asked, do you propose typefaces in the beginning to your clients, or are you proposing them further on in the project? If it's the latter, how do you go about charging your clients?
Oh, good question. I am proposing them from the beginning. And because I think it's like I said before, I'm not typically selling just like a logo. I'm talking about this holistic brand experience and this whole visual world that we're creating. So right now I'm just working on the logo, but like, for example, when I come back tomorrow, say I've chosen, I don't know, say I've chosen this symbol, and I'm kind of into like this thing paired with it. So I would probably show in my presentation like the symbol and the word mark, and I would often have like a display or at least a body typeface that kind of goes with this. And I think it's really important for them to see like this typeface. I like to use different things for the word mark and the kind of rest of the copy usually, but maybe I will pick up one of those more quote unquote feminine typefaces for this. Anyway, I think it's important for the client to see all of these things at once, and I kind of just build it in, geez, my settings here are, so I don't usually show just like, here's the type and here's the color palette. I think that's where those sort of applications become helpful, because then you can start to show those things in context. But to the second part of the question, usually because it's just internal, like if it's a new typeface for me, I'm not licensing it until it's like chosen by the client.
Right.
And so a lot of times foundries will have, I guess I can share one more resource here. There is this Type Foundry directory. So there's like Adobe fonts, which is fonts that are pre-licensed, and you can use them if you have Creative Cloud, which I should probably show you. I have a lot of things already like installed, so I don't often go here first, but
yeah, they have so many
options, and there's this like searchable tool. So if you choose anything from here, which often I will for like body copy or something, then there isn't an additional licensing fee. If you buy something from a Foundry that there are licensing fees based on like if you use it for print materials or for web or for an app. Sometimes there's even a licensing fee for using it in a word mark or something.
Sure.
But this Type Foundry directory sort of has a list of all these. These are all different places that design typefaces, and it tells you if trial fonts are available or not. So if it's not available and I feel really, if I feel really strongly that one typeface is like the right direction, I might sort of pay for that up front or build it into my fee. Just I know I have some licensing costs that I will need to assume as part of the project, but often I will present it to the client and then pass that cost along to them and be like, if you choose this direction, we'll sort of need to license this typeface directly from the Foundry, and here's how much it costs. And if you're just doing a single weight, it's not often that expensive for a client. It's maybe $50 or $75 or something for a weight. But as long as you're not using it kind of like, sometimes I do use those trial typefaces just to get approval before I'm designing anything like real, I would say.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we are going to hop over to the Daily Creative Challenge now and review some of your guys' submissions. Is my screen up? Yes? No? Yes? Yes, I see it. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Cool. Cool. Okay, so the challenge today was to enhance a photograph using vector graphics and layers, playing around with halftones and strokes in the pen tool. Claudia did a demonstration on this earlier. If you missed it, you can always go back and rewatch that to learn more about Illustrator. So let's take a look at some of these. Here we have one by Black Becky, adding an airplane, adding some birds, and this fun little kite illustration.
That's super cool. I mean, I like how the, I don't know, I like the scale of everything. I feel like it, I actually was just looking at it, trying to figure out which elements were the illustration and which were the photograph. It's just the background that's photographic. I feel like what might be interesting in something like this is to play with like kind of layering. So, and it's probably hard to do this with this photo, but could be cool to play with like almost a 2D, 3D look where some things are interacting. So maybe there's an element like the birds or something that are actually going back behind the horizon, so that it kind of has like even more of that push and pull in between the 2D and 3D.
Yeah, that's awesome. That'd be really fun. Great job. Another one. This is so cute.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's kind of what I was saying with the last one, how you can see this like background is going behind the photographic element, and then there is stuff that's like sitting on top of it. That's really fun. It's almost like cartoon type or something on top of the, what are people making these in Photoshop?
I believe they're in Illustrator.
So, cool.
Yeah. I love these little stars added to the car too. Little sparkles.
I wonder, I mean, that's why I was asking if it was Photoshop. There must be some sort of like glow or blur or something, which you can do in Illustrator. But.
Sure. Yeah. Great job making this wavy flag too.
That looks like the Pathfinder tool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Nice little gradient in the glasses too. Cool. Oh, this is fun.
I love it.
Little pineapples.
Like characters. That's super fun.
I love this.
I think again, it's like really fun mix because there are some elements that are photographic, some that are illustrated. And in this case, it's like there's a version of both for the pineapple. It could be cool to like put so all three have like photography and illustration.
Yeah.
Maybe the middle one gets like photographic sunglasses or something on it.
Yeah.
So it's like all collage together.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think this was from yesterday. So this is a different challenge, but using grain. What did they say? Using grain and texture, which looks really great.
Yeah, totally. That's very cool. I actually am
Yeah.
not that great at texture in Illustrator. That's like that little trick that I showed earlier. But
Yeah.
I feel like you can do some of these with like a transparency mask. And I like how this is, I like how it's distributed in this illustration. It's like really balanced. I think sometimes when you do texture, it can be like really overwhelming.
Yeah.
But this is still
nice.
like legible, which is cool.
Yeah. Great job. Okay. Participated at the last minute. That's great. The more submissions, the better. And this some sushi. Yum.
This is cool. I like how it's kind of like certain elements of the photo have been replaced with illustration, not just like adding on to it. Again, I feel like I'm curious like about mixing the approaches, like leaving the real chopsticks or something.
Sure.
But it's kind of a cool, yeah, I wonder if they're like really well drawn. I wonder if it was like the pen tool or something.
Yeah.
And I like the perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Great job. Okay, I think that's all we have for today. There's going to be an XD challenge right after this, so stick around if you're wanting to participate in that. And then tomorrow there'll be a Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge in the morning, and then another Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge as well. So lots of challenges. It's a great way to test out tools that maybe you wouldn't use, or like just play around with different things that you might not try normally. And get feedback. So make sure you guys are watching those videos and submitting. Oh.
Cool. I'm just trying to see what I was actually thinking about here.
We have a few minutes left, so.
Yeah, so at a certain point I will go in and start to like highlight or pull out my favorites, and then start to think about this like secondary elements. And I'll even start to think about, like right now I'm sort of all in black and white, but sometimes I will start to, at this point, think about color a little bit. To me, these two are kind of feeling like interesting. I don't know yet if I want to use the really wacky version of the typeface, but these are kind of feeling like two interesting directions to me.
Yeah. Trevor asked, if the client doesn't have budget for a photo shoot, where and how do you go about getting stock photography?
It's a good question. I think since I'm on this stream, I should tell you Adobe Stock is an option for that.
Adobe Stock is great.
I made this little, not normally this organized, but basically I can show you a couple different sources. Adobe Stock is here. I actually have made I was looking at this yesterday, and just in case we got to applications, I made a little library of some images that I found. You do kind of have to weed through a lot on all of these stock photography websites. So I was searching for like massage, skincare, waxing, like, like skin, face, beauty. But these, I think in this case, like it's kind of a tough art direction challenge, because ideally we would shoot photos of like the space itself or of the services themselves. And in this case, since we can't do that, I don't want to show anything that's more specific than like these types of things for the actual services. So I almost, in this case, would err on the side of just like doing kind of cool close-ups or textures, or like some of these more generic, or not generic, but more like there's less environment to them, so they're a little bit less specific. But basically, there are a couple other ones. Stocksy is another good photography website that has, I made a gallery on here too, but yeah, you can kind of search for whatever, and then they have different options. So like this is one of the images I was looking at earlier. And you can kind of choose different sizes based on what your client needs. So some of these are actually quite affordable, even if you need multiple images, especially if it's just digital. You know, if you're getting to like a billboard or something, then it's going to be more expensive. But I would hope at that point that if a client's taking out that kind of ad space, that they have budget for a photo shoot.
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah. And I think ideally you're also like, you know, I love working with photographers, so anytime I can, I have a lot of friends who are photographers that I would love to hire for projects, but I do sometimes, especially in these early phases, have to use like stock photography. And then just two other ones I wanted to share. Unsplash is one where people can upload, so they're royalty free. They like recommend that you credit. Again, it's kind of like hit or miss just because people are uploading, like I could upload photography, which I should not. But sometimes you can luck out and find some things that you can at least use as placeholders on here. And then two other ones that are more, that I discovered more recently are tonal.co, which is like a...
oh, I don't know this one.
Yeah, this one's for more like diversity-driven stock photography, because often I find that there's like, that's one of the big challenges with stock photography in general, is that it's just a little bit like narrow.
Wow, this is really cool. These are beautiful.
Yeah, and then a similar one is called nappy.co, which I believe that these ones are, yeah, they're royalty free, like photos of Black and brown people.
Cool, that's really
sort
awesome.
of photographers have volunteered. So those are kind of like some resources for that. I would say anytime that you can like have a photo shoot, or maybe like you decide it doesn't require photography and it's more like that you can do illustration for it, or there's a pattern or something. Sometimes that can be equally effective, and then you kind of get to control the whole aesthetic, which to me is ideal.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Great resources. It's nice to have a variety too, because if you just are looking on one site, you may not find exactly what you need.
Yeah, totally.
To have multiple places to go is good. Yes, Shani asked if part 2 is the same time tomorrow. Yes, same time, 12 to 2 Pacific time. We'll be here. Ben's going to show even more of probably getting into applications, you said, hopefully.
Yeah,
and like,
I think, I mean, I don't want to draw circles for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
So I think I'll probably like pick a couple of these to clean up, which I'll do like later today. And then we can kind of go into applications and thinking about that bigger system, which is where it really starts to get pretty fun, especially with those questions about like photography and mockups. I think you can really kind of even like you know, you can see that even I licensed some of these images that I had just pulled up, but you can see how even adding some of these additional elements like start to make it immediately feels
more complete, or more like grounded in something. Yeah.
And this is why I'd recommend usually like doing these applications, even though it is extra work, just because like it immediately, if I was a client, I'd be so much more excited about even like this, just putting it on top of a photo or putting it in a color, than like trying to look at this and the client being like, what is that? It looks like s'more, like marshmallows on a stick, or it looks like what, you know, I think, which is like, you wouldn't believe the type of reactions you'll get like that. But yeah, so it starts to feel a little bit more sort of romantic and real
Yes,
which is what
absolutely.
we'll probably look at tomorrow.
Oh, Maud Pacini says, love your work. Maud,
Oh, hi, Maud.
she was had a stream a few months, well, not a few months ago. It was a while ago. I think towards the beginning of the year. If you guys want to check that out, it was really fun. A late question: what are your other hobbies and interests other than designing?
Oh, I like
Or do you have any?
I do. I like to read. I like to cook.
Yes.
I've definitely started cooking a lot more in
Same.
quarantine.
It's a good time to do it.
Yeah, totally. I like to watch sort of TV and movies. I feel like those are all very generic answers,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
I try not to work all the time. So
Good. You shouldn't.
yeah, cooking is like a nice break, something I like to do with my boyfriend. And
Yes.
we are also like trying to get a dog. So I think that will become like a big, hobby. But,
yes. A lot of time, but worth it.
And then like trying to be outside as much as I can. I think like I live pretty close to Prospect Park. And so we'll like do a picnic at the park or just go for a bike ride or something.
Yeah. Trying to be outside.
Yeah. Nothing like that specific though, I guess. I do work like more than some people. So
sure. Yeah. When you love what you do, it's kind of hard to step away sometimes. Mo's asking if you could just list off the stock sites you mentioned again. Stocksy, Adobe Stock.
For sure.
I
said they're right. Oh, okay. Have it right here.
Nappy.
Stocksy, Unsplash. Offset is like owned by Shutterstock. It's like a higher end one. So it's like nice photography, but it's very expensive. Tonal, Nappy, and then Adobe Stock.
Great.
Or hire a real photographer.
Yes, please. But sometimes you can't, and that's okay.
Sometimes you can't.
Yeah. Cool. If anyone has any last questions or if there's any questions that I missed, feel free to ask them again. We have just a couple more minutes with Ben today, but he'll be back tomorrow. So bring more questions tomorrow. Cool. Yeah. Do you want to just recap for anyone who's just joining, Ben, kind of what you talked about today and what you're going to touch on tomorrow?
Sure. So basically today we were doing kind of the first part of logo design and a branding exploration for a client of mine who's like a beauty / spa brand called Ozemba Beauty. So I started with like my sketching and then kind of picked a couple of these directions to iterate on in Illustrator. Started to look at some typography. This is like a more sort of classic beauty direction, kind of starting to look at like maybe the letters are modified or maybe they're kind of different, establishing a hierarchy in here. And then sort of I was playing with these kind of to go with this more traditional direction, playing with like a geometric abstracted monogram. And so I kind of feel like something in here is working pretty well. This, I don't know what it is, but I am really into it. And so this was just playing with a little bit more sort of abstract geometry, even removing it one further from the monogram. And then I kind of felt like this was reaching, there was something interesting in here, but I wanted to explore a new direction. So I started to look at ones that were more sort of, I guess, a little bit younger feeling, using some of these sans serif typefaces with a bit more personality, and kind of landed or stumbled into this, which I was just so inspired by this geometry that I kind of think that there could be a really interesting, potentially like a symbol that again is like an abstraction of the name, but could pair really well with this. So today it was just the first part of this sort of logo design, and my plan for tomorrow is to sort of pick two of these directions. Maybe it's these two, or maybe it's maybe I'll do some additional exploration, and then tomorrow work on kind of a couple applications like a business card or a postcard or services list and put them into mockups as if I were going to present to the client.
Awesome. That's going to be fun. So make sure you guys come
Yeah.
back tomorrow. One more question. Someone asked, oh, now I can't find it again, but they were asking about design trends, and do you stay on top of them? How important is that? How do you stay on top of them? How do you find out what they are?
I mean, I think that with the internet, these trend cycles have started to happen like faster and faster.
Yeah.
And especially with a lot of these kind of direct to consumer brands, I would say, they start to, a lot of them have a really similar aesthetic. And especially in terms of like typography people are using or photography styles. Like for a while it was natural light and all these overheads, and now it's like studio photography and hard shadows, and you know, so I think like it's good to be aware of those things, because I think then you know if you want to play into them or if you want to kind of go against them, like to be disruptive or to stick out against them. But I think in general, my branding philosophy is much more sort of classic. It's like I believe in like good type. It can be interesting type, but like well-constructed type. I really think of like I design at first in black and white because I really believe in like positive negative relationships and figuring out, looking at contrast that way and figuring out the shapes before you're sort of distracted by color or anything. And I think that leads me to work that is a bit more timeless feeling, even though it can be quite playful. It has a bit more longevity to it, and that's usually what I would recommend. I mean, I guess if your client like wanted to be really hypey, then maybe it would be good to do some trend research. But in general, I think like it's good to be aware of trends. I think whether or not you like play into them is the strategic part of that. But yeah, I think like I like to like that Type Wolf site that I mentioned earlier. They feature a lot of like more contemporary typefaces. There's a range on there, but there's like a newsletter that I subscribe to for that. There are a couple blogs that I follow, but they're not like very trend driven, I would say. It's more just like good design work and finding inspiration that way.
Yeah, it feels current, but it's gonna last. Like things that are gonna be, because sometimes when you go too trendy, it's gonna look outdated soon, you know, even in the next few months or a couple years. So
yeah, definitely.
But you still want to look current and like something like it's something that makes sense right now. But it's that balance of like how do you find something that makes sense for right now and is contemporary while still lasting.
Yeah, definitely. And like in terms of type and stuff, there are situations where sometimes like everyone is using, it feels like one typeface or working with typefaces from one foundry. Or there was a period of time where like after Obama, everyone was using Gotham, the typeface, and it was just like became almost the new Helvetica in terms of seeing it everywhere. And so I think it's good to be aware of things like that so that you can make your work look a little bit more unique if you want to.
I love that on the photo. That's really beautiful.
I mean, photography really can sell a concept.
That's true.
Say.
Yeah. All right, let's pull up the schedule just to take a look at what else is going on for the rest of the day. There we go. So earlier today, there was some Photoshop streams, getting started in Photoshop and the Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge, and then photo compositing. So if you want to learn more about Photoshop, you can rewatch those streams from earlier. Then there was the Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge, which Ben went over. and did some review on earlier in the stream. And then right now we're live with Ben for the next 2 minutes, 1 minute. And then right after this will be the XD Daily Creative Challenge with Howard, and then a draw along with Kyle, and then a design off with Voodoo Val and Delta Tango Mike. So make sure you stick around to learn as much as you can. XD is super awesome. If you guys haven't played around with it, this is a great way to learn it. And we'll be back tomorrow, same time, to talk more about Ben's process and look more into like the later stages of this logo, some application, and yeah, answer more questions. So make sure you come back and tune in again. Cool. Okay. Yeah, thanks you guys for watching, and we will see you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.